When people talk about the story of Jesus, they often talk about the disciples, the miracles, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. But there is one person who appears again and again in the story, sometimes quietly, sometimes in the most important moments, and her name is Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is one of the most misunderstood and mysterious figures in the New Testament. Over the centuries, many stories, legends, and assumptions were made about her that are not actually written in the Bible. Some people thought she was a prostitute, others thought she was a wealthy supporter, others believed she was one of Jesus' closest followers in a special way. But if we look at what the earliest texts actually say, we see something very interesting. Mary Magdalene was one of the most loyal followers of Jesus, and she was present at some of the most important moments in the entire story. Her name comes from Magdala, a town on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. So, Mary Magdalene simply means Mary from Magdala. At that time, Mary was a very common name, so people were often identified by where they came from. The Gospel of Luke tells us one very important detail about her. It says that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her. We are not given many details about what that means exactly, but in the ancient world, being possessed by demons could mean many things. Severe illness, mental suffering, uncontrollable behavior, or deep emotional and spiritual distress. Whatever her condition was, the text tells us that her life was completely changed after she met Jesus. This is probably why Mary Magdalene became one of his most devoted followers. Many people followed Jesus because they were curious. Others followed because they wanted miracles. Others followed because of his teachings. But some people followed because their lives had been changed, and Mary Magdalene seems to have been one of those people. What is very interesting is that Mary Magdalene is often mentioned among a group of women who traveled with Jesus and helped support his ministry. This is something many people don't realize. Jesus was not followed only by the 12 disciples. There were also women who traveled with him and helped support the group financially and practically. In a time when women did not usually travel with religious teachers, this was very unusual. Mary Magdalene was one of those women. Throughout the Gospels, she appears again and again, especially near the end of Jesus' life. And something very important happens here. When Jesus was arrested, most of the male disciples ran away. Peter denied him. The others disappeared for a while, but the Gospels repeatedly say that the women, including Mary Magdalene, stayed near the cross. Imagine that scene for a moment. The crucifixion was a public execution. It was brutal, humiliating, and dangerous to be associated with the person being executed. Yet Mary Magdalene stayed there. She watched the crucifixion. She saw Jesus die. She saw where his body was placed. She was there at the worst moment when everything looked like it had failed. This tells us something about her character. She was not just a follower when things were good and crowds were cheering. She stayed when everything collapsed. After Jesus died, his body was placed in a tomb and a large stone was rolled in front of the entrance. The next part of the story is one of the most important moments in the entire New Testament, and Mary Magdalene is right at the center of it. Early in the morning, a few days after the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. The Gospels say she went very early while it was still dark. Think about that. She did not go when crowds were there. She did not go when it was safe. She went early, alone or with a few other women, simply to visit the tomb and honor the person she had followed. When she arrived, the stone was already rolled away. She ran back to tell the disciples, and Peter and John ran to the tomb to see for themselves. They found the tomb empty and eventually left. But Mary stayed behind. This is one of the most emotional scenes in the Gospel stories. Mary Magdalene is standing outside the tomb, crying. She believes someone has taken the body and she does not know where it is. She looks into the tomb again and sees 2 angels sitting where the body had been. They ask her why she is crying, and she says, "They have taken my Lord away and I don't know where they have put him." Then she turns around and sees a man standing there. She thinks he is the gardener. The man asks her why she is crying and who she is looking for. She asks if he has moved the body and where he has put it. Then the man says her name, Mary. And at that moment, she recognizes him. It is Jesus. This is a very powerful moment in the story because according to the gospel accounts, Mary Magdalene is the first person to see Jesus after the resurrection. Not Peter, not John, not one of the famous disciples. Mary Magdalene. She then goes and tells the disciples that she has seen him. In a way, she becomes the first messenger of the resurrection story. This is historically interesting because in the ancient world, women were often not considered reliable witnesses in court or official testimony. If someone were inventing a story in that time period, they probably would not choose a woman as the first witness to the most important event. Yet the gospel writers consistently say that women, especially Mary Magdalene, were the first witnesses to the empty tomb and the resurrection. After this moment, Mary Magdalene is not mentioned as often in the New Testament, and much of her later life is uncertain. Early Christian traditions say she may have traveled and preached in different regions. Some traditions say she went to Ephesus with John, others say she went to southern France. We don't know for sure. History becomes less clear after the resurrection period. What we do know is this: Mary Magdalene appears at some of the most important moments in the entire story of Jesus. She was there when he was teaching. She was there when he was traveling. She was there at the crucifixion when many others ran away. She was there at the tomb, and she was the first person recorded to see him after the resurrection. That is not a small role. That is a very important role. Over the centuries, many legends were created about Mary Magdalene. Some said she was secretly married to Jesus. Others said she carried secret teachings. Others said she lived the rest of her life in isolation. Most of these stories are not based on the earliest texts, but appeared much later. The earliest sources simply describe her as a devoted follower whose life was changed by Jesus and who remained loyal even when everything looked lost. If you look at her story carefully, Mary Magdalene represents something very human and very powerful. She represents loyalty when things are difficult. She represents gratitude after her life was changed. She represents staying when others leave. She represents searching when others give up. She was not a king, not a priest, not a famous teacher. She did not write books of the Bible. She did not lead armies or build cities. Yet her name is remembered 2,000 years later because she stayed close to a story that changed the world. Sometimes history remembers not only the leaders and the famous names, but also the people who stayed, who followed, who believed, who showed up when things were difficult. Mary Magdalene was one of those people. And maybe that is why her story is still told today. Not because she was powerful, but because she was faithful. Because she stayed when others ran. Because she went to the tomb when everyone thought the story was over, and because she became one of the first people to realize that the story was not over at all.